Constabulary Procedure Manual, Section 4, Subsection 8, Breach of a Class Gamma Quarantine Seal. I had the words memorized, a litany running through my head as the plasma cutter hissed against the door of Hab Block 734. The regulations were a comfort, a solid handrail in the dark. Establish a 2-meter exclusion zone. Scan for atmospheric contaminants pre- and post-breach. Primary team enters in stacked formation. Point man on active auspex sweep. Everything by the book. That's how we impose order on a galaxy that has precious little of it. The air that bled through the final incision of the cutter carried the smell of a forgotten tomb. Stale, metallic, with an undercurrent of something acrid, like old ozone. It was a dead scent. My partner, Vorlog, a hulking Tuskar, whose scarred face was a mask of stoic boredom, gave the door a final shove. It groaned open, a slab of plasteel groaning against a century of rust and silence. "Vance, lights, keep 'em tight," he grunted, his voice a low rumble in our shared comms channel. "Acknowledged, sir," I replied, my own voice crisp and professional. My pulse rifle's underbarrel lamp cut a sharp cone through the gloom, illuminating a maelstrom of floating dust motes. The rest of the team, Hakim, Rena, and our point man, a twitchy kid named Court, fanned out behind us. The beams of our lamps sliced through the oppressive dark of a grand concourse. Storefronts, long since stripped and looted, gaped like hollow mouths. The silence was absolute, a physical weight that pressed on the ears. It felt wrong. Even in the deepest vacuum of space, there was the hum of your own suit systems. Here, there was nothing. My boot crunched on something. I angled my lamp down. A small, delicate structure lay shattered on the floor tiles. It was made of bones, tiny ones, maybe vermin or synth-fowl, lashed together with strips of wiring into a spindly spiral effigy. "Sir, take a look at this," I said, broadcasting my suitcam feed. Vorlag ambled over, his heavy footsteps echoing unnaturally in the dead air. "Squatter art. Let's keep moving. Central security is 2 levels down. We get the logs, we call it a day." His casual dismissal should have been reassuring. Vorlog had seen everything, but as we pushed deeper, we found more of them. Dozens of the bone totems hanging from corroded ceiling fixtures, propped in empty doorways. They grew larger, more elaborate. One was woven around a child's discarded cryo-bear. The sight sent a cold splinter through the armor of my professionalism. This wasn't just art. This was worship. Court was 50 meters ahead, his silhouette a lone figure at the edge of our combined light. His auspex scanner was out, its green arc sweeping back and forth. "Got some faint EM chatter up here," he crackled over the comm. "Feels organic." "Proceed with caution, Court," Vorlog ordered. "Roger that. It's coming from behind this support pillar, moving to—" His voice cut out, replaced by a sound that will be etched into my memory forever. It wasn't a scream. It was a short, sharp gasp, followed by a wet, heavy, tearing sound. The sound of fabric and flesh giving way to impossible force. Court's lamp beam cartwheeled wildly, slicing a frantic arc across the ceiling, before pointing straight down, and then, with a sickening clatter, extinguishing. We all froze. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, more malevolent than before. It was a predator's silence. "Court?" Rena's voice was a strained whisper. No reply. "Formation!" Vorlog roared, his voice like a thunderclap. We snapped into a defensive semicircle, rifles raised, our overlapping fields of light creating a brittle sanctuary in a sea of black. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that suddenly felt obscenely loud. I stared into the darkness where Court had been, my finger tightening on the trigger. My training screamed at me. Identify the threat, assess the situation, act on established protocol. But there was no protocol for this. No manual had a chapter for a sound like that, or for the devouring, patient silence that followed. The handrail was gone. I was in the dark. Panic has a sound. It's the sharp, ragged intake of breath over a comm line, the frantic clicks of rifle safeties being toggled off and on, the high-pitched whine of capacitors charging to full. Our tidy formation was a coil of barely contained terror, our lamps slicing uselessly into the hungry dark. Vorlag, ever the anchor, broke the spell. "Suppressive fire, section Gamma 7 pattern," he barked. The order was rote, drilled into us in 100 simulations. When faced with an unseen enemy in a low-visibility environment, utilize controlled bursts to flush out the target. Controlled bursts. By the book. I centered my sights on the support pillar Court had been investigating and squeezed the trigger. The pulse rifle kicked hard against my shoulder, spitting a bolt of brilliant blue plasma that shrieked through the air. The concussion of the blast was a physical blow, and the muzzle flash painted the cavernous concourse in a microsecond of searing monochrome detail. And in that flash, I saw them. My mind refused to process it at first. It was a violation of space, of logic. They weren't hiding behind the pillar. They were on it, on the walls, on the ceiling, uncoiling from ventilation shafts I hadn't even noticed. A swarm of them. Pale, naked, emaciated things that had once, long ago, been human. Their limbs were too long, their bodies hairless and slick like a cavefish's. But the worst part was their faces. Smooth, unbroken expanses of waxy skin where eyes should have been. And all of them, every single one, had their blank faces turned directly towards the source of the sound, towards us. Then the flash was gone, and the darkness felt 100 times deeper. The afterimage was burned onto my retinas, a writhing tapestry of eyeless, hungry faces. "Magdump, light 'em up!" Hakim screamed, his professionalism shattering into raw fear. He opened up on full auto, a staccato roar of plasma bolts hammering the darkness. Rena joined him, and then Vorlag, and then, a half-second later, so did I. We weren't following a pattern anymore. We were building a wall of noise and light, a frantic attempt to keep the afterimage from becoming reality. For a moment, it worked. Our combined fire was deafening, the concussive blasts making the floor tremble. Splinters of rusted metal and crumbling plasticrete rained down from the ceiling. We were winning. We were asserting our dominance through superior firepower. We were following procedure. Then, through the cacophony, I heard a new sound, a low, wet chittering that grew in volume with every shot we fired. It was coming from everywhere. I risked another burst, the muzzle flash another snapshot of a nightmare. They weren't retreating. They were pouring into the concourse from every crevice, every dark corner, their long limbs scuttling across the floor and ceiling with an unnatural arachnoid grace. They moved with a terrifying purpose, a flowing river of pale flesh, and the river was flowing directly towards the beautiful, terrible noise we were making. The horrifying realization slammed into me with the force of a physical impact. This wasn't suppressive fire. This was a dinner bell. Every shot, every command shouted over the comms, every frantic, panicked footstep was a beacon, guiding them through the dark. Our greatest weapon, the disciplined application of force and sound, was our most fatal weakness. "Cease fire!" I screamed into the comm, the words raw in my throat. "Everybody stop firing!" My call was lost in the storm of our own making. Rena went down with a choked gurgle, her rifle clattering to the ground, its light spinning away into the darkness. I saw a pale arm, thin as a whip and ending in dirty, talon-like fingers, whip out and drag her into the black. Hakim was next, swarmed before he could even turn. Vorlog grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Fall back, now, to the entrance!" he roared, the sound of his voice just another call to the feast. We turned and ran, leaving our dead behind, the sound of our thudding boots echoing down the silent halls like a death knell. We ran. All pretext of training, of tactical movement, vanished. It was a panicked, stumbling flight back the way we had come, our shoulder lamps bouncing erratically, painting the decaying concourse in strobing flashes of terror. The chittering was behind us, a tide of clicks and wet rasps that seemed to gain on us with every echoing footstep we took. My lungs burned, the frigid, dead air a painful fire. I didn't dare look back. The memory of Rena being pulled into the dark was enough. Vorlog was a solid presence beside me, his massive form a bulwark against the tide. He was still shouting, though not commands anymore, just raw, guttural roars of defiance, punctuated by single, aimed shots from his rifle. He wasn't trying to suppress them now. He was trying to kill them, to buy us seconds. Each blast of his weapon was answered by a fresh wave of chittering, a chorus of hungry excitement that vibrated up through the soles of my boots. "Almost there!" he bellowed, his voice hoarse. "Vance, get ready to cycle the outer door controls." Ahead, the breach point was a faint rectangle of less dark, the dim emergency lighting from the corridor, a beacon of hope. Safety was 100 meters away, 50, 30. The thought of clean air, of light, of a world that operated on rules I understood propelled my exhausted legs. The walls around us seemed to shudder with every pulse blast. Dust and chunks of ceiling insulation rained down on us. The whole block felt old, brittle, ready to collapse. The cacophony of our retreat, the pounding of our boots, the rifle fire, our ragged breathing and frantic shouts was a seismic event in this place of forgotten silence. We skidded to a halt beside the massive blast door. I slammed my palm against the control panel, my gloved fingers fumbling for the emergency cycle switch. The panel was dead. No lights, no response. "No power!" I yelled over the din. The breach must have shorted the local grid. Vorlog swore, a curse that was swallowed by a deafening groan from above. I looked up. A huge fissure was snaking across the ceiling directly over the entrance, branching out like black lightning. The structure couldn't take the punishment. Our noise, our violence, was literally bringing the house down. "The manual override," Vorlog roared, pointing to a recessed panel labeled with a faded red sigil. "It's a crank system. Get it open." He turned to face the advancing darkness, planting his feet and raising his rifle. "I'll hold them. You open that damn door." I tore at the override panel, my fingers slipping on the grimy handle. It finally gave way, revealing a heavy, rust-caped crank wheel. I grabbed it with both hands and threw my entire body weight into it. Metal shrieked against metal, the sound an agonizing grind of protesting gears that hadn't turned in 100 years. The blast door shuddered, moving a centimeter. 2. Behind me, Vorlog's rifle boomed, the sound impossibly loud in the enclosed space. A pale form lunged out of the darkness, and he met it with a plasma bolt that vaporized its torso in a flash of incandescent gore. But another took its place instantly, and another after that. The ceiling gave a final mournful scream. With a sound like thunder, a massive section of rockcrete, rebar, and conduit tore loose. It didn't just fall, it cascaded, a landslide of debris that slammed down directly in front of us. It smashed the control panel to bits, sheared the override mechanism from the wall, and buried the entrance in a mountain of rubble. The blast door, now permanently wedged shut, was sealed as thoroughly as if it had been welded. The dust cloud was thick and choking. For a moment, there was only the sound of settling debris. Then, silence. Vorlag's firing had stopped. The chittering from the horde had subsided, as if they were waiting. My comlink crackled with static, the connection to the outside world severed, dead. We were entombed. The outside was gone. The noise of our desperate battle had been our undoing, the vibrations shaking our prison door shut. Trapped, alone, and the things in the dark were no longer frenzied. They were listening, waiting. Silence became the enemy. Every shuffle of my feet, every ragged breath felt like a shout in a library. Vorlag and I were huddled in a small maintenance closet, the metal door a flimsy shield against the horrors outside. We had been silent for hours, listening to the faint, scuttling sounds that occasionally passed by, our hearts hammering a frantic rhythm only we could hear. The raw terror was beginning to crystallize into a cold, pragmatic dread. Running blindly had failed. Fighting loudly had failed. We needed to change the rules of the game. "There's a security substation on this level," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. Section maps showed it about 200 meters from the main concourse. If I can get it powered, I might be able to access the local logs, find a schematic, another way out. Vorlag shifted in the dark. I could feel his gaze on me more than see it. His bravado was gone, replaced by a grim, hunted weariness. "They hear everything, Kalen. One wrong step." "It's a better plan than waiting to starve to death in here," I countered. The by-the-book officer in me was dead, buried under the rubble at the entrance. All that was left was a raw, desperate need to understand. If I understood the threat, I could fight it. The journey to the substation was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. We moved like ghosts, placing each foot with agonizing care, testing the floor for loose debris before putting our weight down. We timed our movements to the groans and creaks of the dying Hab Block itself, using the building's own death rattles to mask our own. The bone totems were everywhere now. their intricate, horrifying forms watching us from the shadows. They seemed to hum with a silent energy, markers in a territory we had so violently violated. The substation door was unlocked, a small miracle. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cooked electronics and ancient dust. A single security terminal sat on a desk, its screen a dark mirror. Using my rifle's power pack, I managed to jury-rig a connection, praying the sudden surge of electricity wouldn't act as another beacon. The terminal flickered to life with a low hum that sounded like a scream in the oppressive quiet. Amber text scrolled across the screen. Hab Block 734. Quarantine logs. Access restricted. My constabulary override codes still worked. A ghost of the old world, a key to unlock this tomb's secrets. I delved into the archives, my fingers flying across the keypad. The logs were heavily corrupted, fragmented, but a narrative began to emerge from the data ghosts. It was a story of a place not just abandoned, but intentionally buried. Log entry 4481, A. Project Chimera showing promising results. Subjects displaying heightened auditory acuity, developing symbiotic relationship with block life support systems. Neuromapping indicates a synesthetic response to power grid fluctuations. Log entry 5012, C. Unforeseen evolutionary acceleration. Dermal layer exhibiting depigmentation. Ocular nerves atrophying completely. Subjects no longer respond to visual stimuli. They listen. They listen to the building, the hum. The hum. A low, barely there vibration I'd been feeling in my teeth, in my bones, ever since we arrived. I had dismissed it as the building settling. It was the life support, the heart of this place. Log entry 6214.f. It's the core. They worship the main power core. They call it the heartbeat. It's demanding more than the emergency nutrient paste. Rerouting waste reclamation isn't enough. System logs show critical power failures in non-essential sectors. To compensate, it requires biomass. It's demanding biomass. The final, uncorrupted entry was a frantic, desperate text message, unsent. Code black. The shepherds are loose. They're taking people to the core. They're feeding it. We're not the masters of this ecosystem anymore. We are the fuel. Seal the block. For the love of God, seal the block. Do not ever open it. My blood ran cold. The floor beneath my feet vibrated with that same steady hum, a deep, resonant thrumming that pulsed with a slow, mechanical rhythm. The sound of a dying machine god, and its congregation was starving. They weren't just mindless monsters hunting us for food. They were priests, shepherds, and they were gathering their offering. We weren't just prey, we were a sacrifice. The knowledge from the security logs changed everything. The darkness was no longer just empty space hiding a threat. It was a hunting ground, and we were trespassing. Every groaning pipe, every drip of water in the distance, every gust of wind whistling through a broken window became a potential trigger. We abandoned the substation, the terminal's faint hum now feeling like a sacrilegious intrusion. Survival was no longer about finding a way out. It was about mastering the art of non-existence. We moved through the Hab's residential spires, the narrow corridors and cramped apartments offering more cover than the wide-open concourse. We communicated with hand signals practiced in bright academies, now repurposed for this lightless hell. A closed fist? Stop. A flat palm? Silence. A pointed finger? Danger. It was a new language, written in the dark. The creature's behavior had changed. The frantic, swarming assault had ceased. Now their presence was more subtle, more unnerving. We wouldn't see them, but we would feel them. A sudden cold spot in the air, the faint, greasy scent of their passage, and always the sound. It was deliberate. A single, sharp scrape of a claw on metal from a corridor to our left, just as we were about to turn that way. We would freeze, backtracking in silent unison, and choose the path to the right instead. Hours later, a piece of debris would be knocked from a high ledge in the stairwell we were about to ascend, clattering down the steps with a noise that made our hearts seize. Again, we would retreat and find another way. A path deeper into the block, always deeper. I was trying to navigate us upwards, towards the roof. An extraction from the roof seemed like the most logical, albeit desperate, plan. But every attempt was thwarted. Every path leading to a main elevator bank or a primary stairwell would be met with a sound, a warning, a door slamming shut in the distance, a series of chittering clicks that seemed to echo from the very shaft we aimed for. They weren't trying to kill us. Not yet. The realization settled in my gut like a block of ice. They were hurting us. Vorlag and I found refuge in what must have been a child's bedroom. Faded luminous stars still clung to the ceiling, a pathetic mockery of the sky we could no longer reach. He was patching a small gash in his arm, his movements slow and deliberate in the dim red light of my emergency field kit. "They're boxing us in," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Every time we try to head for the outer shell, they cut us off." "They're not cutting us off," I said, the words tasting like ash. "They're leaving a path open, only one." I pulled up the partial schematic I'd managed to download. My finger traced our route, a meandering, crooked line. Then I highlighted the locations where we had been diverted by sound cues. A pattern emerged, a slow, inexorable spiral. Every choice we had made, every path we had taken to avoid them, had been the exact path they wanted us to take. At the center of that spiral, marked on the schematic with a heavy circular symbol, was a single location. LVL0, Main Power Core. My breath hitched. "They're driving us to the core, Vorlag, like livestock to a slaughterhouse." My voice trembled, the last vestiges of my constabulary composure finally cracking. I looked at my partner, this titan of a man who had seemed indestructible just days ago. In the faint red glow, his face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by fear. We weren't soldiers on a mission anymore. We were cattle, being guided to the altar by silent shepherds. And the low, constant hum that vibrated through the floorboards was no longer just the sound of a machine. It was the hungry, waiting rumble of a god's stomach. The hunt intensified. The shepherds were becoming less patient, the sounds more aggressive. What was once a subtle scrape was now the shriek of metal on metal, close enough to make our teeth ache. They were tightening the net, forcing us down a specific service corridor on one of the lower levels, the air growing warmer and thick with the smell of ozone and decay. It was a clear ambush. We could feel them on all sides, their faint chittering a pressure in the air. The corridor opened into a small plaza, a kill box. There was no doubt they were waiting for us in the darkness ahead. "This is it," Vorlog panted, his back pressed against a wall. "No other way to go." "There is," I whispered, pointing my lamp at a heavy door to our left. It was different from the others, thicker, with no window, and the faded stenciling on it read, "Audio Sensitive Lab M03, Acoustic Insulation in Effect." It was a soundproofed room, a sanctuary. The locking mechanism was a heavy mag-bolt wheel. It was stiff, but it moved. With a final desperate heave, we cranked it open. A hissing sound of equalizing pressure was the last thing we heard before we stumbled inside and slammed the thick door shut. Spinning the wheel closed, we heard a final, satisfying thump as heavy bolts slid into place. Then, for the first time in days, there was true silence. Not the oppressive, listening silence of the Hab Block, but a pure, sterile absence of sound. The hum was gone. The chittering, the scrapes, the groans of the building, all of it vanished. It was so absolute, it was disorienting. I could hear the blood pumping in my own ears, a frantic, desperate rhythm. We were safe. The feeling was so overwhelming, my knees buckled, and I slid down the wall to the floor, gasping for air that didn't taste of fear. Our lamps illuminated a medical research bay. Desks with forgotten data slates, smashed beakers, and, in the corner, a godsend, a charging station still holding a faint residual charge. Against the far wall sat a row of equipment lockers. One had been pried open, revealing its contents. It was old constabulary riot gear, likely from the initial quarantine. Bulky chest plates, heavy helmets, and something else. I picked one up. It was a sleek, matte black device designed to be worn on a belt. A small decal identified it. XR7 Sonic Suppressor Prototype. I powered it on. A low-level field hummed to life, and a strange sensation washed over me, as if I had been wrapped in cotton. I picked up a metal canister from a table and dropped it. It hit the floor without a sound. Not a muffled thud. Nothing. The impact simply didn't register in the air. "Forelag," I said, my voice barely a croak of awe. He looked over. I gestured for him to listen and dropped the canister again. His eyes widened. A flicker of hope, bright and blinding, ignited in my chest. This was technology. This was order. This was something I understood. It was a tangible advantage, a tool from the world I knew, a world of rules and engineering. The creatures hunted by sound. If we made no sound, we would be ghosts. We could walk right through them. We could get out. There were 2 suppressors in the locker, along with 2 power packs. We strapped them on, a ritual that felt like arming for a battle we could actually win. For a moment, looking at the solid set of Vorlag's jaw in the lamplight, at the piece of advanced tech humming on my hip, I wasn't prey anymore. I was Officer Kalen Vance of the constabulary again. My belief in the system, in procedure and technology flooded back. We were going to make it. The book had failed me, but maybe the gadget would save me. We opened the door to the lab with a newfound confidence that felt alien and exhilarating. The suppressors hummed faintly at our hips, a technological shield against the primitive horrors outside. As I stepped back into the corridor, the deep, resonant hum of the Hab Block returned, but my footsteps were gone. I was a ghost. Vorlag moved beside me, a massive phantom. We grinned at each other in the dark, a silent expression of shared triumph. We were no longer broadcasting our position with every move. We were the silence now. We held the power. The illusion lasted for approximately 90 seconds. We were moving down a wide service tunnel, the path the shepherds had so clearly laid for us. This time, we took it willingly, intending to use their own trap against them. But something was wrong. In the distance, a low chittering began. It was agitated, confused. We froze, trusting in our technology. They couldn't hear us. How could they know we were here? Then I understood. They didn't just hear sound. They perceived the absence of it. The block was a symphony of decay, the constant hum, the groaning pipes, the drip of water. We weren't just quiet. Our suppressors were creating perfect, moving voids in that ambient noise. To their hypersensitive sonar, we weren't invisible. We were two mobile black holes of absolute silence. We were screaming our location louder than ever before. The chittering erupted into a furious, high-pitched shriek. It came from all directions at once, a wave of sonic pressure that made the air feel solid. Pale shapes boiled out of the darkness, a tide of limbs and eyeless faces. They weren't moving towards us. They were swarming the one place in the corridor that held no sound, the medical bay. They were besieging our abandoned sanctuary. The thick, soundproofed door groaned, a deep metallic protest as dozens of the creatures threw themselves against it. We were caught in the open. A few of them, peeling off from the main swarm, turned their blank faces towards us, their heads twitching as they triangulated the two patches of wrongness in their soundscape. "They're on to us!" Vorlag yelled, his voice sounding flat and deadened by my own suppressor field. He raised his rifle. "Run!" The instant his voice left his lips, a half-dozen of the things redirected their charge towards him. The suppressor muffled the sound of his speech, but it couldn't hide the vibrations it created. It was an even more precise target. "The devices! Turn them off!" I screamed, fumbling with the switch on my belt, but it was too late. One of them leaped from the ceiling, its long, spindly limbs unfolding like a nightmarish insect. It landed on Vorlag's back, driving him to his knees. His rifle clattered away. He roared in pain and fury, a sound that drew the rest of them like sharks to blood. In the ensuing chaos, something on his belt sparked violently. The suppressor overloaded by the sonic assault. My own device let out a piercing whine and died. Suddenly, the world was loud again, filled with the horrific sounds of tearing flesh and Vorlag's final defiant screams. The wall of noise was a physical blow. He bought me a few precious seconds with his death. I didn't hesitate. I didn't try to fight. The officer who believed in camaraderie and standing your ground was gone. I was just an animal that wanted to live. I turned and fled into the darkness, leaving Vorlag to the horde. My best equipment, my last real hope, had not only failed, but had become a beacon that led directly to our doom. I ran, fueled by shame and raw terror, now utterly and completely alone. I found myself crammed into a tight ventilation shaft, my body contorted into a painful knot. The air was thick with rust and the grease and bone smell of the creatures. My cheek was pressed against the cold metal, and with every shuddering breath I tried to become smaller, to dissolve into the darkness. Vorlag's scream still echoed in my memory, a phantom sound that mingled with the very real, very present thrum of the machine deep in the station's gut. The hope I'd felt in the medbay was a bitter poison in my veins now. It had been a lie. Technology was a lie. Protocol was a lie. Escape was a lie. I closed my eyes, listening. The sounds of the feeding frenzy had subsided. Now there was just the hum and the occasional patient skittering sound in the corridors below. They weren't hunting me now. They were waiting. They knew I was here, wounded, alone. They had herded me exactly where they wanted me. They would get me eventually, when I was too weak from hunger or thirst to run, and they would drag me down to the core and feed my body to their thirsty god. And in that moment of absolute despair, something inside me broke. The part of me that was Officer Kalen Vance, the part that valued survival, that followed orders, that hoped for rescue, died in that ventilation shaft. It withered away and was replaced by something cold, hard, and clean. Rage. A fury so profound it burned away the fear. They wanted me to go to the core? Fine. They thought they were shepherds guiding a sheep to slaughter? They were wrong. They had trapped a wolf, and they had just shown it the way to the heart of their pack. My objective was no longer survival. My own life was a resource that had already been spent, a cost already sunk. The only thing that mattered now was a new mission, one I gave myself. If I was going to die in this lightless tomb, I would not be fuel. I would be poison. I would be the fist that stops the beating heart. I would pull the temple down on all their eyeless, chittering heads. I wasn't going to run from the core anymore. I was going to run towards it. My movements became deliberate, all traces of panic gone. I eased myself out of the vent, my feet landing on the grated floor of a service corridor with barely a whisper. I checked my pulse rifle. 4 shots left in the magazine. Not enough to fight my way through a horde, but maybe enough to punch through a console or shatter a crucial component. I took stock of my remaining gear: a combat knife, 1 plasma grenade, a nearly dead flashlight. It would have to be enough. The low, rhythmic thrumming of the core was no longer a sound of dread. It was a target, a waypoint. It was the only thing in this universe that mattered anymore. I started moving, my posture low, my weapon held ready. I was no longer prey trying to escape the hunter's maze. I was the assassin, and I was on my way to kill a god. The hum was my guide, and every pulse that vibrated through the floor was a countdown to a reckoning I intended to deliver personally. The fear for my own life was gone, and its absence left a terrifying clarity. I finally understood the rules of this place. The only way to win was to ensure nobody else survived either. The journey to the heart of the block was a pilgrimage in reverse, a descent into hell. The architecture became more archaic the deeper I went, shifting from sterile residential corridors to vast industrial chambers. This was the foundation of the Hab Block, its bones, and the shepherds had remade it in their own image. I emerged onto a catwalk overlooking a cavernous space that must have once been a primary water reclamation facility. Now it was their cathedral. Thick, greasy conduits snaked across the ceiling like the intestines of some great beast, all of them converging on a central point deeper in the facility. The hum was louder here, a physical presence that vibrated in my chest. Below me, the floor was a grotesque mosaic of scavenged metal, stripped insulation, and bones. Thousands of them, arranged in spiraling patterns that echoed the small totems I'd seen near the entrance. In the center of the patterns, groups of the creatures knelt, their blank faces aimed towards the source of the hum, their bodies swaying in silent, rhythmic worship. This was their nest, their temple. I had to get through it without alerting them. I was no longer the noisy intruder. I had to become like them, a creature of silence and precise violence. I watched them for a long time, my cold fury giving way to a predator's patience. I learned their rhythms. Their sonar-like sense was powerful, but it wasn't perfect. They were fixated on the hum, the steady beat of their god machine. And that same machine was my salvation. Every 37 seconds, a massive piston somewhere deep in the block's bowels would fire, a deep, resonant clang that echoed through the entire structure. It was a beat in the heart's rhythm, a moment of overwhelming noise that could cover my own. I began to move. Scuttling across the catwalk, I timed my heaviest steps to land precisely on the piston's beat. Step, step, wait, wait, clang. Step, step, step. It was a terrifying, intricate dance. Below, some of the creatures would twitch their heads at the sound, but they would dismiss it as part of their machine's song. I scavenged as I went, a discarded length of rebar, a fist-sized chunk of broken rockcrete. These were my new tools. At the far end of the catwalk was a ladder leading down into the heart of the chamber. A group of 3 shepherds was gathered near its base, their silence an impassable barrier. I waited for the clang, and on its beat I hurled the piece of rebar against the far wall of the chamber. The metal-on-metal impact was sharp and alien. The creatures below instantly snapped their heads towards the source of the foreign sound. With an unnerving, synchronized grace, they scuttled off to investigate, their long limbs carrying them silently into the shadows. The path was clear. I descended the ladder, the rungs slick with some unidentifiable grime. The air here was hot and tasted of rust. I was in their sacred space now, moving through the bone-littered floor. I felt like a blasphemer in a holy site, my every intention a sacrilege. I could see the tunnel now, the one all the conduits led into. The hum was a deafening roar, a wall of sound that I could feel in my teeth. It was the mouth of the beast. Steeling myself, ignoring the gnawing instinct to run, I stepped into the tunnel and began my final approach into the belly of the beast. The tunnel opened into the core chamber, and the sight stole the breath from my lungs. It was a space so vast it seemed impossible, a cathedral built for a machine. In the center, suspended by a web of colossal cables and conduits, was the core. It wasn't just a reactor, it was a living, breathing thing. A monstrous sphere of rusted, pitted metal, at least 30 meters in diameter, with veins of crackling blue energy pulsing visibly beneath its skin. It throbbed with a slow, steady rhythm, the source of the hum, the heartbeat of the entire block. And with every beat, it let out a groan of immense, ancient pain. Dozens of the creatures swarmed around it, tending to it like priests anointing their deity. Some scraped a foul-smelling nutrient paste into feeding troughs that snaked into the machine. Others draped it with fresh kills, the mutated rats and vermin of the block, while still others simply knelt on platforms below it, swaying in rapture. They were keeping it alive, and it, in turn, was the center of their universe. My path was clear. On a raised gantry that circled the chamber was a single maintenance console, its screen casting the only light in the room, a sickly green glow. That had to be it, my target. I had only one advantage left, my plasma grenade. Waiting for the loudest point in the core's rhythmic cycle, I pulled the pin and lobbed it into a far corner of the chamber, into a pile of metallic refuse. The explosion was a concussive boom and a flash of brilliant white light. Sacrilege. For a moment, every creature in the room froze, its eyeless face snapping toward the blasphemous noise. It bought me the time I needed. I broke cover and sprinted, my boots pounding on the metal gantry. The rage that had carried me here had cooled into a single, diamond-hard point of purpose. I slammed into the console, my fingers flying over the keypad, calling on years of technical training I thought I had forgotten. I wasn't an officer anymore. I wasn't even human. I was an instrument of annihilation. Emergency maintenance, reactor flush protocol, Omega. The words glowed on the screen. It was a last-ditch failsafe, designed to overload the core's magnetic containment and trigger a catastrophic energy release. A corporate suicide pill. I confirmed the command. A new sound joined the chorus, a shrieking, high-pitched alarm. The console flashed a warning, containment failure in T-minus 120 seconds. The sacrilegious act, the digital scream of the alarm, broke the creature's trance. In perfect unison, every single one of them turned their blank faces toward me. The chittering I heard was not hunger or confusion. It was pure, divine rage. The hive turned. The god had been wounded, and its children were coming for the heretic. They swarmed up the gantry supports, their movements a horrifying fluid wave of pale flesh and sharp claws. The first one reached the railing, and I met it with a plasma bolt to the chest. It dissolved in a flash of blue energy. 2 more took its place. I fired again. 2 shots left. I kicked another one back into the swarm below. They were everywhere, their talons scrabbling at the grated floor beneath my feet, their silent, open mouths gaping. I braced myself against the console, rifle in one hand, knife in the other. The chamber was shaking violently now, chunks of the ceiling raining down. The core glowed an angry, hellish red. The timer on the screen read 47 seconds. I wasn't fighting to win. I wasn't even fighting to survive until the end. I was just fighting. An animal, cornered and doomed, spitting defiance at the closing darkness. This was my last stand, my final, brutal act in a world that no longer had a place for me. The last minute was a blur of primal fury. My pulse rifle clicked empty, so I used it as a club, swinging the heavy stock with desperate strength, shattering bone-thin limbs and crushing pale skulls. The combat knife in my other hand was a sliver of vengeance, rising and falling in a frantic rhythm. They swarmed over me, their talons tearing at my armor, their weight threatening to crush me against the console. One of them raked its claws across my helmet, the shriek of metal on metal deafening me as the faceplate fractured. Through a spider web of cracks, I could see the timer on the console. 005. The core was no longer humming, it was screaming, a crescendo of tormented energy that vibrated my bones into jelly. The light it emitted grew from red to an unbearable pure white. The creatures around me seemed to recoil, their chittering turning from rage to fear. They understood, in whatever primal way they had, that their god was about to die. 003. A pale hand grasped my leg. I kicked it away. The world ended. There was no sound, only pressure. A colossal, silent hand slammed into me, hurling me backwards off the gantry. For an eternal moment, I was weightless, tumbling through a maelstrom of white energy and shrapnel. I saw the outer wall of the core chamber, a structure of rockcrete and plasteel meters thick, buckle and then disintegrate like paper. The explosion didn't just destroy the core, it blasted a gaping wound in the side of the Hab Block itself. I was shot through that wound, a human cannonball fired from the heart of a dying machine. My flight was mercifully short. I slammed into a pile of rubble and twisted metal on the ground outside the block, the impact a cataclysm of pain that shattered my left arm and sent a sunburst of agony through my entire body. I landed half buried in the debris, my vision swimming in and out of focus. My ears rang with a high, piercing tone. I could feel the rumble of the Hab Block's final death throes through the ground, but I couldn't hear it. The world had gone mute. The ringing slowly subsided, replaced by nothing, a profound, deep, and total emptiness of sound. Then I registered the air. It was cool, clean. It didn't taste of rust or rot or death. It tasted of nothing, and it was the most wonderful thing I had ever experienced. I took a ragged, desperate breath, my battered lungs screaming in protest. It was the first breath of a new life, a life I had never expected to have. I managed to push myself up slightly, my body a symphony of broken parts. I looked back at Hab Block 734, A colossal black hole had been punched through its side, smoke and dust still billowing out. The home of the shepherds, their god, their entire world, incinerated. I was alive. I was outside. I was free. I opened my mouth to laugh or cry or scream, but no sound came out. I could feel the vibrations in my throat, but the world around me remained utterly, completely silent. Weeks later, the world returned in sterile, silent flashes. The glaring lights of a med bay, the feeling of synth skin knitting over my wounds, the ghost pains of a left arm that was now a sleek, chrome prosthetic. The constabulary doctors had fixed my body with practiced efficiency, but some damage was too deep for a dermal regenerator. They had fitted me with advanced auditory implants, marvels of microengineering that they assured me were superior to the originals. For most of my recovery, I kept them turned off. The silence was a comfort, a thick, heavy blanket I had grown accustomed to. The noise of the ward, the beeps of monitors, the hushed voices of staff, the rolling of service droids felt like a violation, an assault. In the dark, silence meant safety. It was a hard lesson to unlearn. Today was my formal debriefing. A severe-looking man in a decorated officer's uniform sat across from me in my sterile white room. Captain Thorne. He spoke, and I watched his lips move. I'd turned the implants on for this, set them to a low volume, but his voice felt distant, unreal, like a poorly dubbed vid. Commend your bravery, Officer Vance. Your actions, while unorthodox, neutralized a century-old threat. You've been posthumously awarded the Crimson Star to every member of your team. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the window overlooking the cityscape, the streams of sky traffic, the hum of a metropolis alive with billions of souls. It was a world of sound, of life, and it felt utterly alien to me. He wanted to know what happened in there. He wanted a report. He wanted the story to fit neatly into a box, to have a beginning, a middle, and an end that could be filed away. How could I explain the pressure of a silence that listens? How could I describe the hungry thrum of a machine god, or the cold clarity that comes when you decide your own death is an acceptable price? Kalen, did you hear me? Thorne's voice was sharper now, a ripple in the placid pool of my quiet. I turned my head to look at him. I tried to focus on his words, on the rules and the world he represented. But I could still feel the phantom vibration of the core in the floor. I could still smell the ozone. He was speaking a language I no longer fully understood. The interview ended. He left a data slate with commendations and condolences on my bedside table and departed, his face a mask of professional concern and private confusion. He probably thought I was broken, another victim of post-traumatic stress. He was right, but not in the way he thought. I wasn't broken. I was reforged. Alone again, I reached up and powered off the implants. The world snapped back into the comfortable, total silence I now craved. It was clean, empty, safe. My gaze fell to my right hand, my organic one. Without thinking, my fingers began to tap a slow, steady rhythm on the composite material of the table. Tap, tap, tap. A quiet, measured beat, a subconscious habit I had picked up in the deepest, darkest parts of Hab Block 734, a way to measure time, a way to feel my own presence, a way to push back against a silence so profound you could lose yourself in it forever. Tap, 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 an echo of a heartbeat in a world that would never be quiet enough again.